There are a lot of techniques that pros use that you simply don't, and it's costing you so many games. And you might be thinking that this is crazy mechanics or amazing movement, but really it's simple things that the pros do so well, and they might be incredibly obvious, but so important, and everyone is overlooking them. So we're gonna break it all down, starting with conditioning. Now you have to remember that when you use utility to win a round, the enemy will remember what you did. And the next time that you use that utility, they will react to counter your previous strat. By understanding that the enemy is not a bunch of AI, sometimes, you can think a couple steps ahead, understanding that if you use utility well one time, they will change how they are responding to it. And using this to your advantage is the proper way to utilize conditioning. Let's say that you used a certain raise nade to win a sight hit, and it landed perfectly, got you a lot of value. Next round, you can throw a fake by using the same raise nade, and the enemies are more likely to assume it's a real rush because they just lost to that same piece of utility. You're conditioning them to be afraid or react a certain way to a bit of utility, a setup, a sight hit, and then using that to strengthen a fake play, a fake out, or some other play that you're gonna make on the enemy. Conditioning is also used in a lot of ways, like how you're peeking an angle, how you're challenging an angle. And one of the things that people ask is a really super wide swing, or something like a quote unquote pop and swing. Why does something like that work? And most of the time it comes down to conditioning the enemy to hold their crosshair to a close edge, and then you're swinging wide, so they have to flick really far. And this is something that you can utilize with utility, the way you're playing, your strats, and anything in between. Condition your enemy to one thing, use something that you've done successfully, and use that to make an even deeper plan instead of just trying to repeat the same thing that worked over and over again while your opponent adjusts and starts to dominate you back. But if you want to completely trash your opponents in the next games you play, you definitely got to check out SkillCapped right now for everything you need to get better game sense, positioning, and aim. Everything that you possibly need, walking you step by step from beginner to absolute dominant immortal, you can find on the SkillCapped website, and it's only a click away. And the best thing that we do is we offer a money back guarantee. So if you don't climb, you don't pay. So there's literally zero risk. So what are you waiting for? Check it out right now down below. Now, the next thing that pros are doing that you're most likely not is counting enemy numbers based off sound, utility, and footsteps. You can very easily confirm any numbers based on gunfire, utility sounds, and footsteps. Calming confidently on these sound cues will win you rounds. And I don't think enough people pay attention to the small bits of sound cues and understand when certain pieces of utility are used. You're like, okay, I saw this character here, and I know that that character's here, but I just heard a different piece of utility. And I'm using that to help me identify, yeah, they're definitely rushing this site. They're definitely committing to this site. And it's also important to understand that there's certain characters that are really needed for certain site hits. And there are characters that you're like, hey, that initiator or that duelist is like, yeah, they're not going to hit a site without that character. So if that character's here, it's further confirmation. Sometimes making these calls in game where you confidently say they're 100% coming A, rotate A right now, and being right is the absolute difference between winning and losing a round. And that's what you can utilize by paying attention to these things. Now, next up, this is a simple one, but it's so important and will win you a lot of rounds. Asking for utility or suggesting utility. So before hectic situations, there's usually more time for planning than you realize. As a duelist, ask your initiator or other players what type of utility they have and how you want it used. And as an initiator, tell your duelist what utility you have and let them know how you're going to assist them before going in. I know that this seems like a futile conversation because you've had toxic duelists and toxic initiators, but don't let one bad apple ruin the entire batch. Sometimes someone will just hear what you're going to do and they'll come up with a better plan that actually worked just based on a small bit of communication. And this can go a really long way. And it's something that a lot of players don't do because they just get into the mindset of, I have to solo carry every single game, when they don't realize that if they just formed a little bit of teamwork, a little bit of synergy, the game would be so freaking easy to win. Now, another thing that pros do that a lot of players mess up with is simply hiding from utility. And what I mean by this is Valorant has very readable cooldown timers that you can use to your advantage. The best example of this is attacking B side on Ascent. Sovas will always use their dart off cooldown to re-clear B main. If a Sova uses his dart, you know that they will most likely use another dart exactly 40 seconds later. Because that's the cooldown of the dart, you can expect that to come at that time interval. And knowing this, all you have to do is hide out the second Sova dart and rush on the Sova, creating a highly unexpected sight hit. You can disrupt the sight hit, you can predict it coming, and this is a super strong strategy because the enemy team think that they're actually gathering information with the dart. Now you can use the very same concept with this with any rechargeable utility such as Fade Eye and KO Knife. So the further you understand game timings, the better and better you're going to be getting at disrupting enemy play. And if you combine this with a lot of the sound-based and utility-based information we talked about earlier, you can completely predict a lot of enemy strategies, especially when they become overly simplified in ranked play, and just completely shut down a lot of these by using utility before them, meeting their play with some form of aggression. And yeah, it's just gonna be a lot of freaking value. The next up, we do gotta talk about using the mini-map. And everyone's like, okay, Mills, everyone uses the mini-map, but really, do you use it? Well, like pros do. The mini-map can be your best friend, and when you have teammates with bad comms especially, which is gonna be a lot of your games, you wanna have one eye on that mini-map at all times. You really need to be focusing on it because there's so much valuable information just by paying attention. I swear the mini-map gives away crazy amounts of information that a lot of people don't pick up because they're just not focused on the mini-map. They're only focused on what their eyes can see. But when you're jump peeking a corner, when your character sees a character through utility and smoke, when you're normally blind or you're flashed or whatever, but the mini map is not, and it's gathering some of that information when you normally couldn't. And it could be the same way for your teammates. I can't tell you how many times you look up in the top left and your teammate sees an enemy, but they don't know that that character's there, and you're like, it's right next to you, you know, and you're giving them information. It seems like a really simple tip, but it is important, and it's something that pro players have learned to master, where a lot of players don't even really pay attention to it at all. Now for the sixth thing, this is something that a lot of players just don't do enough in most ranks of play, and it's rotating correctly in ranks. So how many times have you attempted to hit a site just to get stuck in main? Your team sits there and does nothing for 30 seconds, and then you get flanked and killed, or you attempt to re-hit and the enemy team hasn't moved. One thing that you should incorporate more is to rotate early and often. I can't express this enough because the vast majority of hits in most ranks come down to a successful rush or a failed rush, right? People hit a site and they'll either hard hit it or they'll fail and all die. And if they rotate, they maybe can scrap by with like one person or like two people maybe. But most of the time, if they rotate, you already lost the game, and most teams don't rotate at all. So what you need to try to do is start a hit, force out a little bit of utility, and immediately rotate early. Like literally a presence, utility use, utility trade, and then just a rotate right off the bat. The second the site hit fails, tell your team to rotate, and most of the time you can actually beat the enemy to the other spike site, and you're rotating at a rather healthy life. You're not trying to trade out a ton of lives, you're not trying to really get stalled out there, you're not trying to really give it a good try to push through. The initial goal is to force out cooldowns, force out trades, and rotate, because I'm telling you, so many fights is just an all-in. It's a rush or not, and teams are gonna just hard overcommit utility into stopping you. Teams are gonna overcommit rotations into stopping you, and if you could just have some successful rotations, you are going to win way more games. And it's an art to make sure that you're not committing so much that it's really, really difficult for you to pull out. Your pull-out game is weak, so to speak. Now, last but certainly not least, this is a really important one, and it's mentally expecting things to happen. So a lot of the time, there'll be some sort of clue before you get pushed with utility, whether it's a footstep, smokes, or a teammate's comm. You gotta stay ready for things to happen the second you see these clues. This will make you better at winning gunfights, turning flashes, and reacting to any unorthodox strategy the enemy attempts. Basically, what this is combining your game sense and understanding of the game with what the enemy could do with their pieces of utility. Understanding that the enemy is not going to just run out in the open when when they have 2 flashes on Phoenix, right? They are going to flash an angle and maybe flash another angle. Basically, you are respecting the plays that your opponents can make, and you're not assuming that they're going to make the worst possible play imaginable. Because here's the thing, if your opponents don't use any common sense, just run it down, and they're doing dumb stuff all game, you're going to beat these players. At least you should, just with your fundamentals. So you need to come up with a plan for when enemies are going to use their utility, going to fight, going to rush, and you're combining all these other strategies we talked about to make better, educated guesses about how the fights are going to move and what type of utility is going to come out, so you can position better, be prepared more, and be caught off guard less. But if you have any questions about any of this, definitely let us know down below, and definitely check out SkillCapped if you really want to level up your gameplay right now. Check it out down below.